July 18th, 1945, 2:34 p.m., Camp Shanks, New York. Heat hung thick and wet over the processing facility, the kind of humidity that made breathing feel like drowning slowly. Helga Weber stood in the third row of 42 German women arranged on sun-baked asphalt, trying not to scratch the lice bites that covered her scalp. Scratching drew attention. Attention meant selection. Selection meant she didn't know what it meant in American hands, but 3 years of Wehrmacht discipline had taught her that standing out was dangerous. Her hair, once blonde and kept in neat braids, was now a matted nest the color of dirty straw. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen it clean. April 1942, maybe, before the lice, before the transport trains, before the months in a makeshift prison in France where 40 women shared 2 buckets of water weekly and soap was a memory so distant it felt like fantasy. The stench of her own body was so constant she'd stopped noticing it weeks ago, but she saw how American soldiers positioned themselves upwind when they had to approach. She was 28 years old. She'd worked radio communications for the Luftwaffe Auxiliary, stationed in occupied France until Allied forces overran her position on June 12, 1945. 5 weeks ago. It felt like 5 years. The woman beside her, Ingrid Strauss, 31, from Stuttgart, swayed slightly, knees threatening to buckle. They'd been standing in formation for 90 minutes, while Americans processed paperwork with the slow efficiency of people who had time and systems and bureaucracy that valued precision over speed. Helga wanted to reach out, steady Ingrid, but moving broke formation, so she stood rigid, feeling sweat carve paths through the grime on her face, feeling lice crawl across her scalp, with the casual ownership of creatures who'd inhabited her body longer than she'd been in American custody. Her Wehrmacht uniform, once gray-blue and pressed, was so filthy the original color had surrendered to brownish black. The fabric stank of old sweat, diesel fuel, and something else she couldn't identify. Despair, maybe. Despair had a smell. If this makes you question everything you thought you knew, you're paying attention. Subscribe now. These stories deserve to be heard. For the entirety of Helga's service, American forces had existed in propaganda as savage liberators who destroyed what they touched. Not as brutal as the Soviets. Nothing in Reich messaging matched the apocalyptic terror reserved for the Eastern Front. But Americans were portrayed as undisciplined gangsters in uniform, cowboys who shot first and ignored laws of war. The newsreels had been specific. American soldiers executed prisoners, particularly women who'd served the Wehrmacht. Sexual violence before execution was implied through careful language and dramatic music, rather than stated explicitly, but the message was clear. Helga had attended briefings in March 1945, when it became apparent that Allied invasion was inevitable. The Luftwaffe officer conducting the session, Hauptmann Vogel, whom she'd never seen before and would never see again, had been blunt. Americans take prisoners for propaganda, then dispose of them quietly. The Geneva Convention is paper they ignore. If captured, expect brutality. If you're fortunate, death comes quickly. He'd distributed cyanide capsules. Small glass vials wrapped in cloth. Instructions for use printed on paper thin enough to dissolve in water. Helga had held hers, feeling the glass warm against her palm, and couldn't make herself put it in her pocket. Not from courage, from paralysis that made decision impossible. When capture came 6 weeks later, American GIs surrounding the communications bunker, shouting in English she didn't understand. She'd searched her pockets frantically for the capsule and felt relief when she realized she'd left it in her footlocker. The Americans had been loud, gesturing with rifles, shouting commands that meant nothing to women who spoke no English. But they hadn't shot. They'd zip-tied wrists, loaded prisoners into trucks, driven them to a temporary holding facility where they'd spent 8 days in a warehouse with concrete floors and inadequate sanitation. Then a ship across the Atlantic, 2 weeks in a hold that smelled of vomit and fear, and finally this. Formation on hot asphalt at Camp Shanks, while American bureaucracy processed them into whatever came next. Sergeant Robert Martinez approached the formation. He was 34, Helga would learn later, New Mexico-born with Mexican heritage that gave him dark eyes and darker hair. He'd served in North Africa and Italy before transfer to prisoner processing. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, boots polished, sergeant's stripes precise on his sleeve. He carried a clipboard and moved with the economical efficiency of someone who'd done this many times. He stopped 10 feet from the first row and spoke in English, voice carrying clearly despite the heat dampening everything else. His accent was unfamiliar. Not the clipped British English Helga had learned fragments of, but something broader. Vowels stretched. He gestured toward a long building behind the formation, single-story structure with windows open, and what looked like steam rising from vents. An interpreter stepped forward, an older woman in American Women's Army Corps uniform, maybe 50, with gray hair and an expression of professional neutrality. She translated Martinez's words into German. You will be processed through delousing and bathing facilities. This is mandatory. You will surrender your current clothing for cleaning or disposal. You will receive clean uniforms. You will be examined for communicable diseases. This process will take approximately 3 hours. Do you understand? Silence. Understanding and belief were different things. Helga's mind struggled to process bathing facilities as something other than euphemism. The propaganda had prepared her for gas chambers disguised as showers, for delousing that meant execution, for any promise of hygiene to be preliminary to elimination. Her breath came shallow. Her vision narrowed. Ingrid whispered, voice barely audible. This is it. Like the Jews. Showers that aren't showers. The interpreter heard. She stepped closer, switching from translation to direct address. I understand your fear. I understand what you've been told. But I promise. This is actual bathing. Soap, hot water, shampoo. You will walk out cleaner than you've been in years. No one will harm you. Helga wanted to believe. The wanting was so intense it felt like physical pain. But belief required trusting enemies, and trust required evidence she didn't have. Martinez gestured again toward the building. First group. 20 women. Forward. Helga was in the first group. They walked, not marched, just walked, unrestrained except by exhaustion, toward the building Martinez had indicated. The structure was long and utilitarian, military construction with no aesthetic consideration beyond function. Steam continued rising from roof vents. Helga could hear water running inside, a sound so familiar and yet so foreign after months without adequate access. The entrance led into a changing room, concrete floor with wooden benches along walls and hooks for hanging clothes. Martinez stopped at the doorway, gestured for them to enter, then stepped back. Nurse Klein will supervise, he said through the interpreter. I'll be outside. Nurse Dorothy Klein emerged from an interior door. She was 42, Pennsylvania-born, had served in field hospitals in France before transfer to prisoner processing. She was broad-shouldered, competent-looking, with brown hair pinned back severely, and an expression that said she'd seen everything and couldn't be shocked. She surveyed the 20 German women crowded into the changing room and wrinkled her nose slightly at the smell. Right, she said in English, then waited for the interpreter. Remove all clothing, everything. Put it in the bags provided. You'll get it back after cleaning if it's salvageable. Most of it won't be, and you'll receive replacement uniforms. Watches, jewelry, anything personal goes in the small bags. You'll keep those. The women undressed slowly, layers of shame making the physical act of removing clothes feel like flaying. Helga unbuttoned her uniform jacket with fingers that trembled. The fabric had fused to her undershirt in places where sweat and grime had created a kind of adhesive. She peeled clothing away, revealing skin she barely recognized as her own, gray with accumulated dirt, red with lice bites, mottled with bruises from sleeping on hard surfaces. Around her, other women undressed with the same painful slowness. Ingrid's hands shook so violently she couldn't manage buttons. Nurse Klein stepped forward and helped without commentary, fingers efficient and clinical. When all 20 women stood naked, Helga felt exposure beyond physical nudity. This was shame made visible. Bodies reduced to functionality, hygiene abandoned so thoroughly that being clean felt like a foreign concept. Klein opened the interior door. Steam billowed out, warm and wet and smelling of soap. Helga's breath caught. Real soap. Not the acrid disinfectant that had passed for hygiene products in the Wehrmacht, but actual soap with fragrance. Lavender, maybe, or something floral she couldn't identify. Through here, Klein said, gesturing. Showers first, then delousing treatment for hair. Then baths. Take your time. The water doesn't run out. The shower room was tiled floor to ceiling, white ceramic that gleamed under harsh electric lights. 10 shower heads protruded from one wall, arranged in a row with adequate spacing between each. Drains were visible in the floor. No doors, no chambers, no mechanism for gas, just showers. Actual showers. Helga approached the nearest showerhead, followed by Ingrid. The others distributed themselves along the wall, moving like sleepwalkers. Klein twisted a valve, and water thundered from all 10 showerheads simultaneously. Hot water. Steam rose immediately, clouding the room, and Helga stood frozen, staring at the cascade. Go on, Klein said gently. Get under. It's safe. Helga stepped forward. Water hit her head and shoulders, hot enough to sting, powerful enough to pound against skin that had forgotten what water pressure felt like. The heat was shocking after months of cold or lukewarm at best. She tilted her face up, letting water pour over features she couldn't see but could feel transforming under the assault. Dirt ran down her body in rivers, brown and gray water circling the drain at her feet. Beside her, Ingrid made a sound. Not quite sob, not quite laugh. A noise that meant overload. Too much sensation to process. She stood under her shower with arms out, water pouring over her, crying openly. Klein distributed bars of soap, large rectangular bars. Military issue, utilitarian and unscented but real. Actual soap that produced lather. Helga took hers, held it in both hands, staring. The weight of it, the smooth surface, the way it felt solid and real and impossibly generous. She brought it to her face, breathing in the clean smell, then looked at Klein. Is this really soap? Klein smiled, first expression of warmth she'd shown. Yes, real soap. Use as much as you need. Helga lathered the soap between her hands. White foam erupted, so copious it seemed impossible. She'd forgotten that soap could do this. Actually clean. Actually remove dirt rather than just redistribute it. She scrubbed her arms, watching years of grime dissolve under her hands. The water at her feet turned darker, black-brown with filth. She scrubbed harder, attacking accumulations with intensity that bordered on violence. The soap moved over her body, revealing skin she'd forgotten existed. Her arms were pale beneath the grime, thinner than she remembered but recognizably hers. She scrubbed her torso, her legs between her toes where dirt had calcified. The bar grew smaller in her hands, wearing away. But Klein had brought more, distributed them freely. There's plenty, she assured them. Don't conserve. After 15 minutes under the showers, Klein shut off the water. Hair treatment next. Follow me. The delousing station occupied the next room. 20 chairs arranged in rows, each with a sink behind it. Klein and 4 other nurses, American women in crisp uniforms, stood ready with bottles and brushes. Helga sat in the nearest chair, Ingrid in the one beside her. Another nurse, younger, maybe 25, approached Helga with a bottle of dark liquid. Kerosene-based treatment, the nurse explained through the interpreter. Kills lice and eggs, burns a little, but it works. Keep your eyes closed. The treatment stank, chemical and sharp. But Helga didn't care. She sat rigid while the nurse worked the liquid through her hair, massaging it into her scalp with firm fingers. The burning was intense but not unbearable. Small price for eradicating the parasites that had colonized her head for so long she'd started thinking of them as permanent residents. 20 minutes with the treatment, then back to the showers for rinsing. Water pounded away the kerosene, carrying dead lice and eggs with it. Helga watched them swirl down the drain, small dark bodies that had been her constant companions for months. Good riddance. She scrubbed her scalp with savage satisfaction, nails digging in, ensuring nothing survived. Then Klein appeared with bottles. Clear plastic bottles with pump tops, filled with pearlescent liquid. She handed one to Helga. Shampoo. Real shampoo. Use it. Helga stared at the bottle. She turned it over in her hands, reading the English label she couldn't understand, but recognizing the word shampoo because it was nearly identical in German. She looked at Klein, then at the bottle, then back at Klein. Is this shampoo? Her voice broke on the word. Klein nodded. Good stuff too. Military supply, but better than nothing. Go ahead. Helga's hands shook as she opened the bottle. The pump mechanism confused her for a moment. She pressed tentatively, and a small amount of shampoo emerged. She pressed again, harder, and a generous dollop landed in her palm. The consistency was strange after years without it. Thick but liquid, smooth and slippery. She brought it to her nose. It smelled like flowers, like spring, like something from a life so distant it might have been someone else's. She worked it into her wet hair, and foam erupted. Thick, white, copious foam that smelled of gardenias or jasmine or something beautiful she couldn't name. Her fingers moved through her hair, feeling strands separate and soften under the shampoo's influence. 3 years of accumulated oil and grime dissolved, rinsed away, replaced by hair that felt like hair rather than straw. Around her, other women were having the same revelation. Ingrid stood under her shower, shampoo foam covering her head like a crown, laughing. Actual laughter, not hysterical, just genuine amusement at the absurd luxury of being clean. Another woman, Helga didn't know her name, was crying while shampooing, tears mixing with water and soap. Someone started humming, a melody Helga recognized from childhood. Guten Abend, gute Nacht, a lullaby. Another voice joined, then another, until 8 or 10 women were humming while shampooing, a strange chorus accompanied by running water. The humming turned to quiet singing, German words echoing off tile walls. Guten Abend, gute Nacht, mit Rosen bedacht, good evening, good night, covered with roses. The irony wasn't lost on Helga, singing a lullaby while shampooing in an American prison facility. But the song fit somehow, soft and comforting. A connection to something before the war took everything. Klein let them rinse and shampoo again. Once more if you want. Make sure it's all out. Helga shampooed 3 times total, each application revealing hair that felt progressively cleaner, softer, more like she remembered. The 3rd rinse ran clear. No more dirt or oil, just clean water and clean hair. She stood under the spray with eyes closed, feeling transformation that went beyond physical cleanliness. Being clean felt like being human again, like existing in a body that belonged to her, rather than to the war. The final station was baths. Actual baths. 10 deep tubs filled with hot water, steam rising, each one large enough to submerge completely. Bars of soap sat on the edges, fresh towels stacked nearby. Klein gestured for them to get in. 2 women per tub to maximize efficiency. Helga climbed into a tub with Ingrid. The water was hot enough to sting, deep enough to cover her chest when she sat. She sank in, feeling heat penetrate muscles that had been cold and tense for so long, she'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. Ingrid sat opposite, submerged to her shoulders, face slack with relief so profound it looked like pain. Is this real? Ingrid whispered. Helga didn't answer. She picked up the soap, lathered it, washed again. Arms, legs, torso, face. The bar became smaller, worn down by use. But she didn't stop. She needed to scrub away every molecule of the past 3 years. Needed to emerge from this bath transformed, reborn, clean in ways that transcended physical grime. They soaked for 20 minutes. Klein came by periodically, checking on them, adding hot water when baths cooled. No one rushed them. No one shouted. The room was quiet except for water dripping and occasional soft conversations between women who were processing the same impossible reality. They were bathing, in hot water, with real soap and shampoo, and no one was hurting them. When Klein finally said, "Time to get out," Helga stood reluctantly. Water poured off her body. Clean water, no traces of dirt. She looked down at herself. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, wrinkled from long immersion but undeniably clean. She could see her own ribs, the sharp angles of hips, the evidence of malnutrition. But she was clean. Towels were thick, military issue, rough but absorbent. Helga dried methodically, feeling fabric against skin that felt new, sensitized, vulnerable, Klein led them to the final room. Clothing distribution. Tables held stacks of uniforms, simple dresses in plain gray cotton, undergarments, socks, shoes. American surplus, utilitarian, but clean. Find your size, Klein instructed. Take what fits. We'll dispose of your old uniforms. They're not salvageable. Helga dressed in clean clothes for the first time in months. The dress was loose, cut for someone larger, but it was clean. The fabric smelled of laundry soap and sunlight. The undergarments were new, tags still attached. The socks were thick wool, soft against feet that had lived in the same pair for weeks. She put on shoes, plain brown Oxfords, broken in but sturdy, and felt almost dizzy from the accumulation of small luxuries. When all 20 women were dressed, Klein led them to a room with mirrors, full-length mirrors on one wall, giving them the first opportunity in months to see themselves. Helga approached slowly, almost afraid. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with cheekbones sharp enough to cast shadows, but clean. Her hair, now dry, was lighter than she remembered. The shampoo had removed so much accumulated grime that her natural blonde had reemerged. It hung past her shoulders, still damp, curling slightly at the ends. She looked sick and thin and exhausted, but she looked human. Ingrid stood beside her, staring at her own reflection. "I forgot," she said quietly. "I forgot I had a face. I forgot I was a person." Several women wept while looking at themselves. Others touched their hair, their faces, their clean clothes, as though checking for reality. One woman, small, maybe 22, started laughing and couldn't stop. Not hysterical laughter, joyful laughter. She spun in front of the mirror, watching her dress flare, clean hair swinging, laughing at the absurd wonder of being clean. Then, impossibly, she started dancing. A simple waltz step, arms raised as though holding a partner. She hummed a melody, something Helga recognized from dance halls before the war. Another woman joined her, then another, until 5 women were dancing in front of the mirrors, waltzing with invisible partners, humming and laughing and crying simultaneously. Helga watched them, throat too tight to speak. The scene was absurd and heartbreaking and beautiful. Skeletal women in oversized dresses dancing in an American military facility because they'd been allowed to bathe, because hot water and soap had restored something propaganda and imprisonment had stripped away, because being clean meant being human, and being human meant the capacity for joy even in circumstances designed to eliminate it. Klein watched from the doorway, expression unreadable. After a moment she smiled, small, private, quickly hidden. Then she cleared her throat. "All right, ladies. Time to move to housing. Follow me." They followed, through corridors and across a courtyard to a dormitory building that smelled clean. No mildew, no sewage, just the neutral scent of scrubbed surfaces. Room assignments were called out. Helga and Ingrid were placed in room 12 with 4 other women. The room had bunk beds, a window with actual glass, and a small coal stove in the corner. But what captured Helga's attention was the sink. A small porcelain sink in the corner, with a mirror above it and a bar of soap sitting on the edge. The same military-issue soap from the bathing facility, placed there for daily use. The implication was staggering. They could wash whenever they wanted. Soap was available. Water ran from the tap. Helga approached the sink, picked up the soap, turned it over in her hands. It was identical to the bars she'd used hours earlier, but smaller, personal-sized. She set it down carefully, precisely, in the exact center of the sink's edge. Then she looked at her reflection in the mirror. Still gaunt, still exhausted, but clean. This wasn't sentiment. This was policy, though Helga wouldn't understand the framework for weeks. The American approach to prisoner management operated under Geneva Convention guidelines, but implementation varied by commander and facility. Camp Shanks was administered by the U.S. Army Service Forces under Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, 47, a career officer who'd spent 2 years implementing prisoner protocols in North Africa before transfer stateside. Patterson's philosophy was documented in facility memos Helga would never see, but would experience the effects of: prisoners of war will be processed through delousing and hygiene protocols upon arrival. This serves four purposes. First, disease control. Lice carry typhus, fleas carry plague, poor hygiene breeds epidemic. Second, psychological stability. Clean prisoners are calmer, more cooperative, less prone to violence or despair. Third, intelligence value. Prisoners who've been treated humanely are more likely to provide useful information. Fourth, and most important, maintaining moral and ethical standards that distinguish American forces from enemies who violate Geneva protections. We are not cruel because cruelty is easy. We are civilized because civilization requires choosing restraint. These four pillars, security through health, psychological management, intelligence gathering, and moral authority, shaped every aspect of camp operation. Soap wasn't generosity, it was disease prevention. Shampoo wasn't luxury, it was lice eradication. Hot baths weren't kindness, they were systematic decontamination. But the implementation, the details, the way Nurse Klein distributed shampoo and let women bathe twice and allowed spontaneous dancing, that transcended policy. That was choosing humanity when efficiency would have sufficed. Over the following days, Helga learned the camp structure. Wake at 06:30, morning roll call at 07 hour in the courtyard. Breakfast at 07:30, oatmeal with milk, toast, coffee or tea. Work assignments from 09 hour to 12 hour, then again from 13:30 to 17 hours. Meals were adequate, approximately 2,500 calories daily. Work was fair, laundry, kitchen assistance, facility maintenance, nothing punitive or exploitative. But what Helga noticed most was access to washing. The communal lavatories had sinks with running water and dispensers of liquid soap. Showers were available 3 times weekly on a rotating schedule. Each room received 2 bars of soap weekly for personal use. The luxury of washing hands before meals, of brushing teeth with provided toothbrushes, of being able to clean oneself whenever needed. These small dignities accumulated into psychological transformation. By the 3rd day, Helga had established a routine. Wash face and hands upon waking, brush teeth, smooth hair that no longer felt like straw. The bar of soap in room 12 became communal property, passed between 6 women who each used it carefully, conscious of making it last. But when it wore down to a sliver, Nurse Klein appeared with replacements. "You'll get new ones every week," she said through an interpreter who'd been assigned to their dormitory. Mrs. Hoffman, 60, German immigrant who'd lived in America for 40 years. "Use them. Don't hoard." Ingrid, whose English was slowly improving through necessity and exposure, asked, "Why do you give us soap?" Klein looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because you need it. Because hygiene prevents disease. Because, why wouldn't we?" The answer was so simple it bordered on incomprehensible. In Wehrmacht facilities, soap was scarce, rationed, often withheld as punishment. The idea that soap was simply provided because prisoners needed it, not as reward for good behavior or leverage for compliance, just as standard provision, required mental recalibration. In August, Helga developed a skin infection. The constant scratching from old lice bites had created open wounds that became infected despite her efforts to keep clean. The rash spread across her scalp and down her neck, angry red welts that oozed and itched unbearably. Mrs. Hoffman noticed during morning roll call, "You need medical attention. Come with me." The camp infirmary occupied a converted barracks, white-painted interior with examination rooms and a small ward. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, 39, examined Helga's scalp with gentle efficiency. "Secondary infection from the lice infestation," she diagnosed. "We'll treat it with topical antibiotics and oral medication. You'll need to avoid scratching. I know it's difficult, but scratching spreads infection." Vasquez applied cream that burned initially, but then numbed. She prescribed pills, sulfa drugs, Helga would learn, and gave instructions for keeping the wounds clean. Wash twice daily with mild soap. Pat dry, don't rub. Apply this cream after washing. Come back in 5 days for follow-up. The treatment worked. Within a week, the infection had cleared. The rash faded. Helga's scalp healed, leaving only faint scars where the worst sores had been. The care was matter-of-fact, professional, identical to what she'd have received before the war in a German civilian clinic. The equality of treatment, prisoner receiving the same antibiotics and attention as American soldiers, was destabilizing. If you're beginning to see how deeply propaganda shaped every corner of this war, and how fragile those illusions were, subscribe now. The full picture is always more complicated than the myths. September brought a celebration Helga hadn't anticipated. On September 15th, Mrs. Hoffman appeared in the dormitory with surprising news. Tomorrow is Sergeant Martinez's birthday. Colonel Patterson has authorized a small celebration. Prisoners are invited to attend if they wish. There will be cake. The celebration occurred in the camp mess hall, transformed temporarily with streamers made from strips of colored paper and a banner someone had lettered, "Happy Birthday, Sergeant Martinez." American soldiers and German prisoners mingled awkwardly, neither group entirely sure how to navigate this strange détente. Martinez himself looked uncomfortable with the attention, but accepted good-natured ribbing from his fellow sergeants. The cake was small, made with limited ingredients rationed for the occasion, but it was real cake. Flour and sugar and eggs baked into something sweet. Slices were distributed to everyone present, prisoners and soldiers receiving equal portions. Helga ate hers slowly, letting sweetness dissolve on her tongue, tasting sugar and vanilla and the impossible normalcy of birthday cake in a prison camp. Private Tommy Sullivan, 19, approached Helga and Ingrid with awkward friendliness. He'd been trying to learn German, motivated by some combination of genuine interest and boredom, and attempted conversation in mangled German-English hybrid. Gut cake, ja? Birthday, Geburtstag, is good reason for, Kuchen? Ingrid smiled despite herself. Yes, good cake. Thank you. Sullivan beamed at successfully communicating, then wandered off to attempt conversation with other prisoners. His earnestness was disarming. He clearly saw no contradiction between guarding prisoners and being friendly to them. They were people who happened to be on opposite sides of a finished war. The war was over. Why maintain hostility? In October, male privileges began. Helga wrote to her mother in Mannheim, carefully wording the letter to pass censorship. I am safe in America. I am healthy. The camp is clean and orderly. I work in the laundry and receive adequate food. I hope you are well, and that our city is recovering. I miss you. Helga. She didn't mention the soap, or the shampoo, or the dancing, or the birthday cake. Those details felt too intimate, too vulnerable to misinterpretation. But she hoped the subtext was clear. She was alive, she was being treated fairly, and the propaganda had been lies. Her mother's response arrived in December. The envelope was travel-worn, addressed in handwriting that looked shakier than Helga remembered. Inside was a single sheet of paper. We heard you were dead. Thank God you're alive. Mannheim is devastated. Our neighborhood is rubble. Your father still hasn't returned from Russia. We fear the worst. Food is scarce, but we survive. The American occupation forces are strict but fair. Better than we were told to expect. Come home when you can. We need you. Mama. Helga read the letter 3 times, each reading deepening her understanding that everyone had been lied to. Her mother's surprise at American fairness mirrored Helga's own surprise at soap and shampoo and medical care. Both sides had been fed narratives designed to dehumanize the enemy. Both sides were discovering that reality was more complex than propaganda allowed. By winter 1945, the camp had settled into routines that began feeling almost normal. Work continued. Helga had been assigned to the laundry, washing sheets and uniforms in industrial machines that made the work manageable rather than brutal. She found satisfaction in the visible results. Dirty fabric transformed to clean, stains removed, wrinkles pressed smooth. The work had purpose. Sergeant Martinez supervised the laundry with the same professional efficiency he'd shown during initial processing. He rarely spoke beyond necessary instructions, but his presence was steady, reliable. On particularly cold days, he'd bring thermoses of coffee and distribute cups to workers taking breaks. The gesture was small but consistent. Not friendship exactly, but acknowledgement of shared humanity. In January 1946, an incident revealed the system's limits. A new guard, Corporal Dennis Walsh, 26, recently transferred from another facility, made a crude comment during evening inspection. Helga didn't understand the English words, but the tone and accompanying gesture were unmistakable. Ingrid, whose English had improved enough to catch the meaning, went pale. Before any prisoner could respond, Private Sullivan, standing nearby on guard duty, stepped forward. "Corporal Walsh, that's inappropriate." Walsh laughed. "They're German prisoners. They don't understand anyway." "Doesn't matter," Sullivan insisted, voice harder than Helga had heard. "Sir, that violates protocols. Should I report to Sergeant Martinez? Or will you?" Walsh's amusement died. He looked at Sullivan, then at the prisoners, then back at Sullivan. "You're seriously going to—" "Yes, sir." Walsh left without another word. Sullivan remained at his post, face flushed, but expression determined. Martinez appeared 20 minutes later, spoke briefly with Sullivan, then left. Helga never saw Walsh again. The message was identical to incidents in British camps. Inappropriate behavior toward prisoners wasn't tolerated. Guards who couldn't maintain professional standards were removed. That night, Helga lay in her bunk, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. She'd retrieved the bar of soap from the sink, now worn to a thin wafer from 6 weeks of use, and held it in her palm. The soap was nearly gone, used up through daily washing, but the sense of dignity it represented persisted. Being able to wash, being clean, having access to basic hygiene, these weren't luxuries. They were affirmations of humanity. She thought about the propaganda she'd absorbed. Americans as savage liberators, prisoners as disposable, capture as death sentence. Every particular had been false. She'd been bathed in hot water with real shampoo, given soap weekly, treated for infections, fed adequately, housed in clean quarters, defended by young guards like Sullivan, who saw violations of dignity as serious offenses. If all that was lies, what else had been false? The racial theories that justified the war, the claims of Germany's defensive position, the narrative that certain peoples were subhuman and could be eliminated? If Americans could be decent and the propaganda painted them as monsters, how much of Germany's entire worldview was constructed on similar fabrications? Helga didn't have answers. The questions themselves were dangerous, destabilizing, liberating. They required rebuilding her understanding from foundations up. The soap in her hand, thin, nearly exhausted, but still functional, became symbol of that reconstruction, something simple and utilitarian that represented the choice to maintain standards when abandoning them would be easier. In March 1946, repatriation schedules were announced. Helga's group was assigned to mid-April transport. She had 6 weeks to decide whether returning to destroyed Mannheim was preferable to remaining in the structured stability of Camp Shanks. The choice was complicated by letters from her mother describing conditions: rubble, hunger, fuel shortages, economic collapse. But family required her presence. Staying would be abandonment. On her last evening at Camp Shanks, April 14, 1946, Nurse Klein appeared at room 12 with a small package wrapped in brown paper. She handed it to Helga. "For the journey, and for remembering." Inside were 3 bars of soap, the same military-issue soap that had become so familiar, and a small bottle of shampoo. Klein had also included a handwritten note in English. Mrs. Hoffman translated, "You survived with dignity. Maintain it. Nurse D. Klein." Helga tried to thank her, struggling with English that remained limited despite months of exposure. Klein waved off the gratitude. "You worked hard. You deserved better than you got before here. Go home. Rebuild. Stay clean." She smiled at the last words. A joke, but also not a joke. The journey back took 5 days. Truck to New York Harbor, ship across the Atlantic, train through shattered Germany toward Mannheim. Helga carried a small bag with her few possessions. Letters from her mother, the clean dress she'd received at camp, and the soap and shampoo from Klein, wrapped carefully to prevent breaking. Mannheim was worse than letters had described. Entire districts reduced to rubble fields. Her family's address led to a half-collapsed building where her mother lived in 2 rooms with no running water, no electricity, and inadequate heating. Her mother looked ancient, emaciated, aged decades in 3 years. But she wept when Helga arrived, holding her daughter with strength that seemed impossible from such frail arms. "You're alive. You're alive and you're clean. Thank God you're clean." Decades later, in a modest apartment in rebuilt Mannheim, Helga Weber, married now, mother of 2, grandmother of 3, kept a bar of soap on the bathroom windowsill. Not the original bars from Camp Shanks, long since used up, but a modern bar, French milled with lavender scent, that she replaced monthly and never actually used. It sat on the windowsill as reminder, as testimony, as symbol of the moment hot water and shampoo restored her humanity. Her granddaughter, 16 and studying World War II in school, asked about it one evening while visiting. "Oma, why do you have decorative soap? That's so old-fashioned." Helga was folding laundry, a habit from Camp Shanks she'd never abandoned, finding peace in transforming disorder to order. She set down a towel and picked up the soap bar. "This reminds me of America, after the war, when I was a prisoner." "They gave you soap in prison?" "Yes, every week, and shampoo. And hot water for bathing." The girl looked confused, her understanding of prisoner camps shaped by Holocaust documentaries. But weren't prisons terrible? Some were, Helga said carefully. "The one where I stayed treated us like human beings. They gave us soap because hygiene mattered. Because we mattered, even as prisoners. Why do you keep it now?" Helga returned the soap to the windowsill, positioned precisely where morning light would catch it. "Because being clean isn't just about removing dirt. It's about dignity, about choosing to treat people, even enemies, as humans deserving basic care. This soap reminds me that even in the worst circumstances, some people choose decency. That choice matters more than weapons or victories." Before you go, subscribe. Because history isn't just what happened. It's what we choose to remember and why. The soap remained on the windowsill, replaced monthly but never moved from its position. Helga washed her hands multiple times daily, a habit from the war years she'd never broken. And each time she saw the decorative soap, she remembered. Remembered the moment Nurse Klein distributed shampoo and 42 German women realized they weren't going to die. Remembered women dancing in front of mirrors because being clean restored joy they'd thought extinct. Remembered that civilization is a choice made daily through small acts, providing soap, offering shampoo, allowing dignity when eliminating it would be easier. The war had taught millions that enemies were inhuman, that prisoners deserved only minimal survival conditions, that cruelty was strength. But in a converted facility at Camp Shanks, New York, a different lesson was taught through hot water and real shampoo. Humanity persists when people choose to maintain it. Dignity survives when structures protect it. And sometimes the measure of a civilization is as simple as soap, freely given to women who'd been told to expect only death. The bar sat in morning light, lavender-scented and perfectly clean. Testimony to the truth that decency costs little, but means everything. That hot water and shampoo can restore more than cleanliness. They can restore the belief that humanity survives, even in war. Especially in war.